Welcome to my channel. Subscribe to the channel and listen to my stories every day. Life had a way of disguising chaos beneath layers of routine. For years, my marriage to Emily seemed unshakable, a rock-solid partnership forged through love, trust, and mutual respect. Together, we'd built a life many would envy, a charming house in the suburbs, a precocious 9-year-old daughter named Lily, and careers that offered both fulfillment and stability. Emily worked as a senior consultant for a prominent marketing firm, her schedule peppered with frequent business trips to meet high-profile clients. While she jetted off to exotic locales, I held down the fort at home, balancing my IT job with parenting duties. It wasn't an arrangement I resented. I admired her ambition and cherished the bond one had with Lily. If anything, I considered myself fortunate to have a partner whose drive complemented my steady pragmatism. But in hindsight, cracks had always been there. They weren't obvious, just small inconsistencies I brushed off. Emily's trips had grown more frequent in the past year, often extending by a day or two for client bonding. Sometimes, her phone would buzz late at night, and she'd excuse herself to take the call in another room. "It's just work," she'd say, and I believed her. Why wouldn't I? She had never given me a reason to doubt her. Until that Thursday morning. Emily had left early for her flight, leaving behind her usual whirlwind of activity, coffee cups abandoned on the counter, a suitcase haphazardly zipped, and her laptop charging on the kitchen island. It wasn't unusual for her to leave it behind on short trips, trusting me to keep it safe until she returned. That morning, as I tidied up the kitchen, her laptop pinged with a notification. "Meeting rescheduled to 3 p.m., read the innocuous subject line. I smiled, shaking my head at how Emily could never seem to escape work, even on the road. But as I went to close the laptop, another notification appeared. "Last weekend was incredible." The words froze me. A wave of unease washed over me, but I quickly dismissed it. Surely, it was harmless, an email from a client or a marketing contact reminiscing about a productive meeting. Yet, something compelled me to click. My hands trembled as I opened the email, my heartbeat drumming in my ears. "Can't stop thinking about you, Em. The way your laugh lit up that room, the way your hand lingered on mine. Counting the days until we meet again. Love, Greg." The message hit me like a freight train. My mind scrambled to rationalize it, to find some innocent explanation for why a man named Greg was sending my wife messages drenched in intimacy. But no matter how I tried to frame it, there was no escaping the truth. Emily was cheating on me. I closed the laptop with a shaky hand, my chest heaving as though the air had been sucked from the room. Betrayal wasn't just a word anymore, it was a knife twisting in my gut, leaving behind a hollow ache I couldn't comprehend. In the hours that followed, I oscillated between fury and disbelief. How long had this been going on? How could she betray me after everything we'd built together? But most of all, why? What had I done, or not done, to make her seek someone else? By evening, I had calmed enough to think clearly. Confronting her immediately would be futile. She was hundreds of miles away, immersed in a business trip that now seemed like a thinly veiled excuse for infidelity. I needed more than one email. I needed proof. Emily's laptop became my lifeline. That night, after tucking Lily into bed, I returned to it with a resolve I hadn't felt in years. I navigated through her email archives, piecing together fragments of conversations between her and Greg. Their exchanges were subtle at first, work-related banter interspersed with light-hearted jokes. But as the weeks progressed, they grew bolder, more personal. References to shared meals, inside jokes, and intimate moments painted a vivid picture of a connection that had spiraled far beyond professional boundaries. And then there were the photos. Tucked away in a hidden folder marked "personal," they left no room for doubt. Emily and Greg were seated at a candlelit table on what appeared to be a beachside restaurant. Her face was aglow with laughter, her hand resting lightly on his arm. In another, they stood side by side, their bodies closer than colleagues had any business being. My stomach churned as I clicked through the images, each one more damning than the last. The anger returned, white-hot and unrelenting. I wanted to call her, to scream at her for what she'd done. But reason held me back. What good would an emotional outburst do? If anything, it would give her the chance to spin her lies, to manipulate the narrative before I had the chance to uncover the full scope of her betrayal. Instead, I turned my attention to preparation. Over the next few days, I quietly gathered evidence, screenshots of emails, saved copies of photos, and even records of her flight itineraries that coincided suspiciously with Greg's city. I needed an airtight case, not just for my own peace of mind but for what I knew would come next. By the time Emily returned from her trip, I had built a file thick enough to rival a legal dossier. She greeted me with a smile, kissed my cheek, and asked how Lily had been. To anyone else, she would have seemed the picture of a devoted wife. But all I saw was the mask of a liar. That night, as she unpacked her suitcase, I stood in the doorway, watching her with a calm I didn't feel. She glanced up, noticing my presence. "What's wrong?" she asked, her tone light. "Nothing," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just thinking about how much I love you." She smiled back, her eyes softening. But even then, I could see the flicker of guilt beneath her gaze, a telltale sign that she knew something wasn't right. It was only a matter of time before she'd know how much I knew. The days after Emily's return passed in a haze of forced normalcy. I maintained the facade of a devoted husband, but beneath the surface, every interaction with her felt like a chess move. My mind was a battlefield of rage, betrayal, and an unshakable determination to reclaim control. Emily, for her part, seemed unfazed. She resumed her routine as though nothing had changed, early morning runs, late nights spent, catching up on emails, and the occasional work call she'd take in the other room. I watched her closely, noting the subtle changes. She was more distant, distracted. Her smile seemed practiced, her laughter hollow. It was as if her heart wasn't entirely present, and now I knew why. I had no intention of confronting her until I was ready. Anger alone wouldn't win this war. I needed a plan, one that would expose the truth while preserving what mattered most, Lily. My daughter's innocence was a sanctuary I couldn't bear to shatter, even as the foundation of our family crumbled beneath us. Late one night, after Emily had gone to bed, I retrieved her phone from the nightstand. She was a heavy sleeper, lulled into oblivion by the wine she'd had with dinner. Her phone was locked, but I knew her passcode, our anniversary. The irony wasn't lost on me as I keyed it in. I scrolled through her messages, searching for Greg's name. There it was, buried beneath a sea of mundane texts to friends and coworkers. Their conversation was as damning as the emails I'd uncovered. They spoke of longing, of stolen moments, of plans for their next rendezvous. One message in particular caught my attention. "I can't wait to see you again, Em. Let's make the next one a weekend to remember." It was dated just 2 days ago. My chest tightened as I realized their affair wasn't just a thing of the past, it was ongoing. I took screenshots of their messages, carefully deleting any traces of my intrusion before returning her phone to its place. As I stood there, watching her sleep, I felt an odd mixture of anger and pity. How could she lie so effortlessly? How could she risk everything we'd built for a fleeting thrill? The next day, I contacted an attorney. Her name was Amanda Cross, a sharp, no-nonsense woman with a reputation for dismantling cheating spouses in court. I laid everything on the table, the emails, the photos, the texts. Amanda listened intently, her expression a mask of professionalism. "You've got a solid case," she said when I finished. "If this goes to court, the evidence of infidelity will work heavily in your favor, especially when it comes to custody of your daughter." I nodded, though the thought of dragging Lily through a custody battle made my stomach churn. "I don't want to hurt my daughter," I said. "She doesn't deserve to be caught in the middle of this." Amanda's eyes softened slightly. Then we'll aim for mediation first. If Emily's as practical as you say, she might agree to a fair settlement without a fight. But you need to prepare for the worst. That night, I drafted a plan. It wasn't enough to confront Emily privately, I needed to expose her lies in a way that left no room for denial or manipulation. The idea crystallized as I stared at the photos of her and Greg on my computer screen. A family dinner. That's where it would happen. By the weekend, the stage was set. Emily's parents were visiting for dinner, along with my sister and her husband. The small gathering felt like the perfect opportunity to pull back the curtain on her double life. I spent the day preparing, cooking Emily's favorite dishes and ensuring the house was spotless. If she suspected anything, she didn't show it. The evening started innocently enough. We ate, laughed, and shared stories, the kind of familial warmth that once defined our lives. But as dessert was served, I decided it was time. Emily, I began, setting down my fork. There's something I need to share with everyone. Her eyes flicked to mine, a hint of confusion crossing her face. What is it? I reached beneath the table and pulled out the manila envelope containing my evidence. I've been doing some digging, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. And I've discovered something troubling. The room fell silent. Emily's parents exchanged worried glances, while my sister leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. Emily, however, stiffened. What are you talking about? She asked, a nervous edge creeping into her tone. I slid the envelope across the table. Go ahead, I said. Open it. Her hands trembled as she lifted the flap and pulled out the contents. Photos, emails, and screenshots spilled onto the table, a damning mosaic of her infidelity. Her face turned ashen as she scanned the evidence, her breath hitching audibly. This isn't what it looks like, she stammered, her voice cracking. Oh, it's exactly what it looks like, I shot back, my tone cutting. You've been lying to me, to all of us. While I was here raising our daughter and holding this family together, you were off with him. Her parents stared at her in stunned disbelief, while my sister muttered something under her breath. Emily's mother spoke first. Emily, is this true? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tears welled in Emily's eyes as she struggled for words. It was a mistake, she said finally. I didn't mean for it to happen. I don't know what I was thinking. A mistake. I repeated, my anger bubbling to the surface. Mistakes happen once. This was deliberate. You lied to me over and over again, every time you left for one of your so-called business trips. Emily looked around the table, her expression pleading. I still love you, she said, her voice breaking. I made a terrible mistake, but it doesn't mean I don't love you. Love doesn't look like this, I replied, gesturing to the pile of evidence. Love doesn't betray and manipulate. Love doesn't risk destroying a family for, what? A fling. The room was thick with tension, the weight of her betrayal hanging heavy in the air. Emily's father cleared his throat, his face a mask of disappointment. Emily, he said, his voice firm, you need to take responsibility for this. You owe Mark the truth. But Emily had no truth to offer, only apologies and excuses that rang hollow. As the night wore on, it became clear that there was no salvaging what we once had. The woman I thought I knew was gone, replaced by a stranger who had torn our family apart. By the time the evening ended, I felt an odd sense of relief. The truth was out, and there was no turning back. The storm had arrived, and I was ready to weather it. The days following the dinner were a whirlwind of emotions and logistical chaos. The confrontation had left Emily scrambling to regain control, but the truth had already cemented itself. There was no erasing it, no returning to the facade of a happy marriage. The damage was done. Emily spent the first few days trying to mend what was left. She followed me around the house, pleading for forgiveness. Her excuses came in waves. She was lonely, overwhelmed, disconnected. Each justification felt like a slap, as though her betrayal could somehow be rationalized away. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said one morning, her eyes red from crying. "It was stupid and selfish, but it didn't mean anything." "Didn't mean anything?" I snapped, my anger flaring. "Months, maybe years, of sneaking around, lying to me, lying to Lily, and it didn't mean anything? Don't insult me." Her face crumpled, and for a moment, I felt a twinge of pity. But it quickly dissipated, replaced by the cold clarity that forgiveness wouldn't fix this. I didn't trust her anymore, and without trust, there was no foundation left to stand on. That week, I moved into the guest bedroom. The physical distance was symbolic, a clear boundary that marked the end of our intimacy. Emily tried to bridge the gap, leaving notes on my pillow, making my favorite meals, even suggesting counseling. But every effort felt hollow. Her actions had spoken louder than her words ever could. Meanwhile, I focused on Lily. Shielding her from the fallout became my top priority. She was too young to understand the intricacies of betrayal, but she wasn't blind to the tension that had settled over our home. "Dad, why are you sleeping in the guest room?" she asked one evening as I tucked her into bed. I hesitated, searching for the right words. "Sometimes grown-ups need space to figure things out," I said finally. "But no matter what happens, I'm here for you. Always." She nodded, though the worry in her eyes lingered. "Promise?" "I promise," I said, squeezing her hand. The legal process began in earnest. Amanda Cross proved to be every bit as ruthless as her reputation suggested. She filed for divorce on my behalf, citing adultery as the cause. The evidence I'd gathered made the case almost bulletproof, but that didn't stop Emily from fighting back. Her lawyer, a polished man with a silver tongue, attempted to paint her as a misunderstood woman who had made a mistake in an otherwise strong marriage. They pushed for joint custody of Lily and an equal split of our assets, claiming that her infidelity didn't negate her rights as a mother or a partner. But Amanda wasn't having it. She countered with a meticulous breakdown of Emily's actions, emphasizing the emotional and psychological impact her betrayal had on me and the potential instability it could cause for Lily. "This isn't about punishing your wife," Amanda told me during one of our meetings. "It's about creating a stable environment for your daughter. Joint custody might sound fair on paper, but given Emily's choices, you're in a better position to provide that stability." I nodded, though the thought of dragging Lily through a custody battle left me uneasy. Still, I knew Amanda was right. Emily's actions had proven she wasn't thinking about what was best for our family. I had to protect Lily, even if it meant going to war. Emily, for her part, tried to manipulate the situation. She leaned heavily on guilt, reminding me of the good times we'd shared and the sacrifices she'd made for our family. "Do you really want to tear Lily's life apart over this?" she asked one evening, her voice trembling. "We can make this work, Mark. For her." "You should have thought about that before," I replied, my tone steely. "You made your choices, Emily. Now we have to live with the consequences." Her frustration bubbled over, and for the first time, her true anger emerged. "You act like you're perfect," she snapped. "Like you've never made mistakes. But you weren't exactly present, Mark. You were always working, always distracted. I felt invisible." "Don't you dare pin this on me," I shot back. "I was building a life for us, for our daughter. I trusted you to be honest, to have my back. If you were unhappy, you should have told me, not gone running to someone else." She had no response to that, just tears and silence. The argument ended like so many others had, no resolution, only exhaustion. By the time our court date arrived, the lines had been firmly drawn. Emily's parents, once staunchly supportive of her, had distanced themselves after learning the full extent of her betrayal. My sister and her husband remained in my corner, helping with Lily whenever I needed a break. The courtroom felt less like a battleground and more like the final chapter of a story I hadn't wanted to be part of. Amanda presented our case with precision, highlighting the evidence and painting a clear picture of Emily's betrayal. Emily's lawyer fought back, but the facts were irrefutable. The judge ruled in my favor, granting me primary custody of Lily and a larger share of our assets. Emily was left with visitation rights and a fraction of what she had hoped for. As we left the courthouse, Emily approached me. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow. "Mark, please," she said quietly. "Don't take Lily away from me. She's all I have left." "She's not a bargaining chip," I replied. "You can see her, but you don't get to use her to fix your mistakes." Emily nodded, her shoulders sagging under the weight of her choices. "I'm sorry," she whispered. But the words felt too little, too late. That evening, I sat in the living room with Lily, watching her favorite movie. She leaned against me, her small hand clutching mine. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of peace. The storm had passed, and though the scars remained, I knew we would find a way forward. Life wouldn't be the same, but it would go on. And this time, it would be built on truth. The weeks after the court ruling were a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. The house felt emptier without Emily, though it had been her presence, the deceit and the tension, that had hollowed it out long before she left. Lily and I adjusted quickly to our new routine. We filled our days with school, work, and small adventures to distract ourselves from the shadows of what had been. But there were signs I couldn't ignore. Lily had always been a bright, curious child, but now her questions lingered on topics too heavy for her age. "Why doesn't Mom love us anymore?" she asked one evening as I tucked her into bed. The question broke something inside me. I tried to explain, keeping my words simple and free of blame. "Mom loves you, sweetheart," I said, brushing her hair back. "She just made a mistake, and now we're figuring out what's best for everyone. But if she loves us, why did she leave?" Her eyes, so full of innocence, begged for an answer I couldn't provide. "She didn't leave you, Lily. She left me. And that's something grown-ups sometimes do, even when they don't mean to hurt anyone." She nodded, though her expression betrayed her understanding. I kissed her forehead and stayed by her side until her breathing slowed and she drifted to sleep. As I sat in the dim room, I felt the weight of her questions settle on my chest. This wasn't just my pain anymore, it was hers too. Emily's visits were infrequent at first, stilted and awkward. Lily would light up whenever her mother arrived, her joy untarnished by the betrayal that had shattered our family. Emily played her role well, bringing gifts and smiles, but beneath her facade was a woman unraveling. It became apparent during one of her visits. She was thinner, her usual polished demeanor replaced by a nervous energy that set me on edge. "Mark, can we talk?" she asked as Lily played upstairs. I gestured for her to sit. "What is it?" She hesitated, wringing her hands. "I've been struggling," she admitted. "Losing you, losing our life, it's been harder than I thought. I don't know how to fix this." Her vulnerability caught me off guard. For a moment, I saw the woman I had fallen in love with, the one I had built a life with before it all fell apart. But that woman was a ghost, and I couldn't let her haunt me. "You can't fix this, Emily," I said gently but firmly. "What's done is done. The best thing you can do now is focus on being there for Lily." She nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. I miss us." I said nothing. There was nothing left to say. A few months later, I noticed changes in Lily. She became quieter, withdrawn. Her laughter was less frequent, her once bubbly demeanor dulled by something I couldn't quite name. At first, I attributed it to the upheaval in her life. But as time passed, her behavior grew more concerning. She stopped wanting to go to school, claiming stomachaches and headaches that the doctor assured me were stress-related. Her drawings, once filled with bright colors and cheerful scenes, became dark and abstract, a swirl of lines that seemed to echo her inner turmoil. I tried everything: therapy, time off school, even reducing her visits with Emily when she seemed overwhelmed after returning from her mother's. But nothing seemed to help. The light in her eyes was fading, and I was powerless to stop it. The final blow came on a gray November afternoon. I had just finished a meeting when I received a call from Lily's school. She had collapsed during recess, clutching her chest and gasping for air. By the time I arrived at the hospital, she was stable but pale, her small frame looking impossibly fragile against the stark white sheets. She had a panic attack, the doctor explained. But her symptoms suggest something more. We'll need to run some tests. The hours that followed were agonizing. I sat by her side, holding her hand as she slept, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Emily arrived not long after, her face streaked with tears. For once, we were united in our worry, our differences forgotten in the face of our shared fear. When the results came back, they shattered what little hope I had left. Lily had a rare and aggressive heart condition, one that had gone undiagnosed until now. The doctor's prognosis was grim: without a transplant, her chances of survival were slim. Emily broke down completely, her sobs echoing through the sterile room. I held her, not out of love but out of shared grief. In that moment, none of our past mattered. All that mattered was Lily. The weeks that followed were a blur of hospital visits, consultations, and futile attempts to maintain some semblance of normalcy. Emily and I took turns staying with Lily, our shared pain forging an uneasy truce. But as her condition worsened, so did our desperation. One evening, as I sat by Lily's bed, she opened her eyes and looked at me with a clarity that made my heart ache. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I don't want to leave you." Tears blurred my vision as I stroked her hair. "You're not going anywhere, sweetheart. I promise." But deep down, I knew I couldn't keep that promise. Lily passed away on a cold December morning, her small hand clasped in mine. The world seemed to shatter in that moment, the weight of her absence crushing me in a way I hadn't thought possible. Emily and I held each other as we wept, our shared grief the only thing anchoring us in a world that suddenly felt empty. In the weeks after, Emily moved back into the house. It wasn't a reconciliation: our love was long dead, buried under the weight of betrayal and loss. But we needed each other to survive, to navigate the unbearable void Lily had left behind. Life went on, as it always does, but it was quieter now, emptier. The house that had once been filled with laughter was now a mausoleum of memories, each room echoing with what could have been. In the end, I realized that betrayal wasn't the most painful thing Emily had ever done to me. The worst pain was losing Lily, the one person who had been truly innocent in all of this. And as I sat alone in the quiet of the night, I couldn't help but wonder if the universe was punishing us for our sins, for the love we had squandered. Because in the end, all that remained was the silence.